All right. So thank you all for joining us for the seventh annual Broadleaf Writers Conference. Before we get started, we have some housekeeping announcements to assure that we all have the best online experience. First of all, if you have questions for our panelists during any of the sessions, use the Q&A prompt at the bottom of your Zoom screen during the session. This will allow us to address as many of the questions as time allows toward the end. Please ask questions throughout as well. First of all, next of all, if you feel you might be in the wrong session now, or you get curious about any other sessions that might be happening now or later, the links for the other sessions are going to be both in your program that you received prior to the conference. We'll be putting links in the chat as well. If you have a one-on-one pitch with an agent or a mentoring session scheduled, please arrive 10 minutes before your scheduled time to the one-on-one room so that our team can check you in there. And so then believe in yourself. You're going to be great. We believe in you. Our official book seller for the conference is Foxtail Bookshop. The titles from our writers and the recommended titles on writing can be found in the bookstore page on our website. That link will also be available in the chat and in the program. Additionally, Foxtail will be hosting, this will be next week, our in-person Author Palooza event on October the 22nd, or 2 weeks out. I can't tell time anymore. At 1 p.m. in Woodstock, featuring several of our panelists and other special guests. We were just talking about that beforehand. It's going to be a lot of fun. The Broadleaf team will also be hosting lunchtime chats with the authors today and tomorrow. So follow the link in to the one-on-one room if you want to get in those lunchtime chats. It'll give you a chance to connect with more of our guests. We're offering a pre-registration special for next year's conference right now. That link will also be in the chat, and you can find it in the program. Finally, you can also become a member or renew your membership when you pre-register. Additionally, as a growing nonprofit, we rely on donations from our community to help fund the operations of organizations. So if you want to contribute, you can either do so when you pre-register or you can visit the donation page on our website. All right, that is out of the way. Time is an illusion. There's no spoon. Great. So before we jump into our chat, if you haven't met our authors today, we're really blessed to have Denny Bryce, Robert Gwaltney, Peter Farris, and Marlena Frank here with us. Would each of you mind just giving us a quick intro, and then we'll jump into our questions?
Sure.
Hi, I'm Denny S. Bryce. I'm an author of Wild Women in the Blues, as well as In the Face of the Sun. I am also a former professional dancer in my youth. I also ran a marketing and PR firm for a while. And I have a couple of books that I'm working on that are due this month. So let's get started. Next.
Marlena?
My name is Marlena Frank. I'm a young adult fantasy and horror author. I read everything from short stories to novellas, novels, and series. I just like all lengths of storytelling.
And I'm Robert Gwaltney. By day, I work for Easter Seals North Georgia, a nonprofit here in Atlanta. My role is vice president, and in all the hours between, I'm a writer. I'm a debut novelist. My first book, The Cicada Tree, was just released in February, and I'm thrilled to be here today.
And I'm Peter Farris. Wrote a book called Last Call for the Living. My new novel, The Devil Himself, came out this year in May. And I live in Cherokee County, just north of Atlanta.
You don't have very far to go next week, Peter.
No, it's local to me, so I'm excited. Yeah.
So if you were here for our panel this morning, we have some of the same faces, and we'll be talking about some similar concepts. We had a panel on publishing this morning. So if you didn't get a chance, stay tuned for the replays, because there was a really great conversation around publication and agents and how to get started on that path. Today, we're going to talk about, you wrote a book, now what? And so this is more about marketing and about putting your work out there and sort of taking the steps beyond your first book. So luckily we do have Denny here, who I found out after I reached out to my panelists that she teaches a course on marketing for authors. And so we have a very wonderful resource with us today. And so I'd like to start with a couple of the questions that Denny brought up in our email conversation, which is, so you're on your first book. Did you create a marketing plan separate from the publisher's plan? And since you brought it up,
So,
Denny, or go ahead, jump in, Marlena.
Okay, I'll start. Yes, I definitely had a marketing plan before my book published. In fact, I had a marketing plan 10 years before my book was published. And the reason for that is probably because I was a marketing professional and thinking ahead to what it was I wanted to accomplish and looking at the role of social media in that goal. I have been active on all of the social media platforms for a while. I have the first thing I did was have a website with my author name. Denny S. Bryce is not my legal name. I feel it's important to have a plan because for so many authors, the barrier to marketing is that it feels foreign and it feels all consuming. And with a plan, you have control.
Well,
and
I
I,
agree.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Marlena.
I was just going to say that whenever I first submitted, my first novel was to a small press, and part of the submission guidelines actually said, "What's your marketing plan for this book?" And I had some preparation for that. I started out doing like cosplay for a few years, which helped me get used to the convention scene, helped me get used to like being out in front of people because I was super introverted going into this. And that really helped me out a lot. So I had a bit of an understanding of what I was going to be getting into and how to look up locations for events and stuff like that going into my first book. So that helped.
I had to, like Marlena was just stating, I did have to submit a marketing plan to the publisher, and I'm very green. I'm learning. This I'm a debut novelist. My book just came out this year, but I would say about a year and a half out is when I started to panic and started to try to get some work done in that arena. I did work with a publicist who was very helpful in helping me collect my thoughts and lay out a framework within which to work.
Yeah, I should be paying to watch you guys because I've never done anything right on this front. Like my first novel came out. I grew up with a novelist for a father and had this romantic old school view of publishing, which was, at least it used to be in this country, where writers could be invisible. I do yearn for this too. Writers could be invisible, and it didn't matter, if you were active on this front. It was the publisher's job to sell the book, and what only thing that mattered for a writer is what's on the page. I still adhere to that, but when my first book came out on, it was published by a Big Five at the time, Macmillan / Forge Books. They had a publicist, and I had no clue about any of this stuff, had no plan in place. I just thought, after watching my dad, who's made a career, wrote 50 plus novels, that they would do that stuff. And I was happy to oblige and to go here or talk to people there. Social media was still kind of in its infancy, and I was active on every platform and had a blog, but had no clue what I was doing. And I wish I could go back and have a redo on that, because I realize how important it is now. So I'm happy to be the sacrificial lamb here for the folks out there. Listen to what the other three folks, if we're doing Hollywood Squares, don't do what Pete does. Pete is like what you don't do, because I still am very contrarian to a lot of this stuff. But yeah, I didn't have any sort of marketing plan at all. And my first book was produced well, but it was published very poorly, and I suffered for it because it was like an albatross around my neck. Sales of that book were held against me for years and years and years, which is why it took me 10 years almost to get a new book out in English.
So we've established that, yes, a marketing plan is important. Robert spoke to his timeline, but can we all maybe speak to our timelines? Like, at what point in, the life cycle of your book coming out, when do you launch your online platform? So whether that's choosing your media channels, launching a website, So let's actually break that down into two questions. One, how soon before the launch of a book do you start marketing? And then B, do you select particular channels or places that you want to market, or do you cast a super wide net? Or both? I mean, let's start with you, Denny.
I think that my philosophy is once you have committed to a career as an author, now that's a scary sentence for a lot of people because there are so many factors that you have to weigh. But whether you indie publish or are published by the top 5 or top 10 traditional publishers, you the sooner you get out into visibility in today's marketplace, I emphasize today's marketplace, because right now I believe authors are small business owners. And as a small business owner, you have to let people know that you exist, and social media is a tool through which you do that. You also, another thing I'll say is that social media platforms aren't necessarily there for the author or the small business to say, oh, I only like this one or like that one. The platforms are out there because your readers or your target audiences have different ways they want to connect with the author slash actor slash anybody that they're interested in. So sometimes you just have to look at those platforms of how can I manage the ones that are most applicable to my target audience.
What I find most interesting, and I think Peter touched on this earlier, is that, once upon a time, you only had to write a good book. And now, not only do you have to write a good book, but you also have to be a personality in today's
You don't have to write a good book either.
Okay, yeah, you don't have to write a good book. No,
There's
whatever.
that.
So I think that social media is so critical. I mean, everything that Denny just stated is certainly true. I was late to the game in social media. I've only been on for a few years. And I was intentional in not really initially having an author Facebook page and just using my personal Facebook page so that people could have more direct access to me, since I'm just starting out as a debut novelist. And I can see we're an individual who's been around for a while, but sort of scaffold that marketing plan, and you would perhaps transition into an author Facebook page. But for me, I can't do everything. So I try to focus on the things that I think that I can do well. So I really focus my attention on Facebook and Instagram. I'm not sure that book talk is age appropriate for me. We'll see. I will never say never. But it's certainly, it's been a learning curve for me, most definitely. And what's been, I think, most important for someone just starting out is having relationships with authors who do know what they're doing. And I found that for the most part, 99.5% of the time, other authors are very generous and very willing to share what they've learned along the way with you.
Just kind of building on what Denny said earlier, one of the first things I did when I first had a short story get picked up, I think that was back in 2010, was get a website built. And even though I didn't publish very much during that time for several years, I had my website up and I could post regularly about what I was writing, what I was working on, that sort of thing. And it helped to gain an audience and a group of followers. Whenever I was doing cosplay, social media was a huge thing, a huge part of it. TikTok and things like that are a lot easier for the cosplay scene. But whenever I was getting back into being an author and started focusing more on that, that's a very different process. I started focusing more on Facebook and Instagram are my main areas, writing young adult, and also making sure that I was distributed so that I would be able to be reached by libraries, because that's a huge area too. So.
I was going to just add real quick. I was thinking of my timeline. My first novel came out in 2012, the hardcover for Last Call for the Living. and it sold a year prior. So I had 12 months. And in that time, it's like I said, I had a website, a blog, and I joined social media. At the time, Facebook and Twitter were the only game in town. And I started to realize there's this whole community, because I'm a crime mystery writer, of crime mystery, writers out there. And when you first start out, it's a lot of writers talking to each other and selling books to each other. And that's okay. That's totally okay. But it was a great foundation for me, even though I haven't done anything right in this respect. I discovered flash fiction. I discovered online journals and websites, and I started publishing some short pieces prior to the release of Last Call for the Living, and just started like developing relationships with people, getting a few things out there you can share that show off your chops. And it did help a little bit to create some buzz for Last Call for the Living when it ultimately was released. Now, Forge, again, did a great production job, but within about 2 or 3 weeks, like most books, it just disappeared off the face of the earth. And I couldn't will that book into the limelight. That's a huge challenge. The big challenge is, of course, getting other people to talk about your book, not you, because we talk about our books all day long till we're blue in the face. So I had about 12 months trying to do all of that. And some of it I did okay. Some of it I wish I could do over again. But to the point of connecting with writers online, 10 years later, I finally have a new book out in English. I just checked out and was writing for France. Devil Himself comes out. And my first novel had a little bit of a cult following, and there were some writers and readers out there who still remembered me. And I circled back and said, hey, I finally got this book out again. And some of the same people I connected with 10 years ago were active online. They were publishing themselves, and they helped me sort of boost the signal for Devil Himself when it came out. And all of that was just me getting online and networking and meeting writers and being generous and selfless, because some writers, again, it's a community, and you want to support each other. You have to remember it's not just about you, and everybody thrives if you pick each other up. So I had to learn that lesson too, but it paid off. I still had people who cared 10 years later when I thought nobody cared about anything I wrote in this country. So
See, I think Peter Farris knows what he's doing.
I just want to see pictures of people's cats and like what records they're listening to online. Like, honestly.
That's why I have stuffed animals if I'm tempted down that path.
There you go.
I just wanted to ask about cosplay. What fandom were you in? Are you in for cosplay?
Fandoms that I've been in have been like the Batman fandom, manga stuff for like Black Butler and things like that. I have a huge friend group that's involved with that. So, and various cosplay and fandoms can really help out with whatever area you're writing in too.
Right, because I wrote fan fiction, and I wrote Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Buffy Spike, and that was one of the ways that I got involved in understanding the power of social media. And some of my early events, and this is going back, when did I start writing fanfic? Probably 2005. It was after the series had almost ended. And so it's really those interest levels that you have that you want to share that may not necessarily be about your book. That's where I talk somewhat about brand versus marketing promotion. What is your brand? What is those characteristics of you as a writer that you want to communicate through your social media platforms? I love music. If you go to my Instagram account, you're going to see a lot about classic Black Hollywood and music. Any entertainers, I love the entertainment industry. So that's what I'm sharing, in addition to the fact that my books include things about entertainment. The cover of Wild Women in the Blues, she's a chorus girl, she's a dancer. In the Face of the Sun is Black Hollywood, 1928 and 1968 Chicago. So, take those things that are of interest to you, because sometimes that just helps you go to those platforms and share. Your marketing not only a book in this day and age, but sometimes you're also marketing your brand. You don't have to be totally open to the world. That's not what we would want, but you are a celebrity. It's just according to what rank you are. Like I'm at D level, but we're moving into the C class.
Denny brings up a good point. I think that really what's foundational prior to developing a marketing plan is really understanding who you are as an author and what is your brand. About a year and a half out, I took an online marketing class, Denny K Marketing. And I went through this whole exercise of where I just took myself through, like, who am I as a writer? What is my brand? Who will be interested in me? And I came up with, the tagline, spellbinding fiction with a Southern drawl. And you really want to have a sense of who you are, and you do want to be consistent. So when someone goes to your Facebook or Instagram, they're going to know what to expect of you.
And I want to add on to that too, like the more books you write and the more you kind of grasp onto the style of your writing and the genres that you like to write in, the wider the net will be for your readers. So like I started out writing a young adult fantasy series trilogy, which is kind of crossover to upper middle grade. And the next book I wrote after that was a young adult horror, which was a much higher age level. But I have people who find my work through my horror and they love that, but they're not a huge fan of the fantasy. And then I have other readers who love the fantasy and aren't a huge fan of the horror, and then some that like both. So if I hadn't written the standalone horror novel, I would never have found those readers.
So we had an interesting question come up here in the chat. When you're structuring your time, like how do you allocate time towards working on publicity? Is it something that you would, schedule into your day, or would you block off like a certain day of the week to work on marketing? Like how does it fit into your routines as writers?
Well, I'll kick it off. It's a daily routine for me. I start, and some people say this is not, you shouldn't start your day with social media, but I do. I spend an hour every morning, and I'm usually still in bed, I must admit, just doing what I need to do for that day, or on my different platforms. I connect my platforms so that if I post on Instagram, it appears in Facebook. If I post on Twitter, it appears someplace else, so that I consolidate some things. But that's me, because I'm comfortable with that routine, and I am a full-time writer. So that's how I approach it. One thing that I share with my class as part of your plan is to identify to really take a hard look at your schedule and how your writing pattern goes and how you can add social media time. The most important thing about social media, someone has already said, is consistency. If that consistency means you're always changing something once a week or daily or 3 times a week, just try to keep the pattern going.
Yeah, I could jump in and add, even though I came to all this very clumsily, I decided to just have sort of different temperature or color to each social media platform. So like Instagram, I mix a lot more personal stuff. So you're going to see a picture of my dog and what record I'm listening to. And although I've set boundaries for myself, and this is all a personal choice, but I have strict rules about no politics, no religion. I don't want to get into controversial subjects. If you do and have no filter, that's cool too. I don't care. But also, I love spending time outdoors and spend a lot of time in the woods, but I know like hunting is a delicate subject and some people might not understand it. So I'm going to be very careful about what I share in that regard. Facebook is strictly just for books. Twitter's also, I have very sort of specific things, especially if I'm traveling or doing something. I like to share more stuff on Twitter. If I go on a French book tour next year when my new book comes out, I'll be using Twitter a lot more and Instagram because there's a lot of French readers on both of those platforms. So I decided to like look at all 3 of those. I don't know what TikTok is and I just don't care anymore. And just kind of give them a little bit of personality. And this is just what I like to do. I think to speak to Denny's point, consistency is great. And in my case, I sort of have found a sweet spot where like Instagram, I'll mix in pictures of my family and me doing things with my son, for example, to personalize it. Because the one thing I don't care for is the sort of robotic author who just punishes you every day with hashtags and marketing promo. I would much rather know that you're human and that you have a cat, or like you are listening to this great record or saw a great movie, or you and your wife are celebrating your anniversary. I love that stuff on social media. What I don't love is 10 times a day you hitting me with 7,000 hashtags to pre-order your book, because I've been that guy and done it too. So that's kind of how I've approached social media, just to make it more interesting for me, and kind of like, oh, I feel like sharing something personal, I'm going to go on Instagram, and that's kind of how I do it.
It's a good plan.
I've been actually oh, go ahead, Robert.
No, well, so just quickly, I mean, I find that I actually get more responses when I post something personal, as opposed to something that might just be specific to literature or the book.
Since I'm a historical fiction author, I'll just pull something from history, something that I've been researching or whatever, and I find that gets a lot of response for my regular posts. And interesting, you mentioned Facebook as a place to market your books. I find that my personal Facebook account is a great place to market my books. And that has changed over time, because Facebook's algorithms have changed over time. And that personal page actually has a little bit more sales power than it used to long ago. So that's just an evolution of Facebook, because it's an older demographic. And I know TikTok is scary, but TikTok is selling books.
It is.
It's really doing a good job of selling books. I actually dabble in TikTok.
I'm TikTok curious now, so
It's not pretty, but I'm there. Barnes and Noble has a whole thing with their book talk, as you mentioned, and every last one of the major publishers are over there. And then look at Colleen Hoover. If you are someone who watches the New York Times Colleen Hoover list, she's on all 100 of her books are on the New York Times bestseller list, but she is dynamic on TikTok. And all she's doing is like talking, fun stuff. She's not trying to, sell her books, but her books are in the background, like, they're there, but she's talking about whatever, and she's engaging.
I've actually been doing a lot of my pushes on my mailing list. I've got a good footprint on several social media applications, and I post around there, especially because this year I'm doing rapid releases for a book series I'm doing. So especially around that time, I definitely cross promote across platforms to build up interest and to get people interested again in what I'm working on. But yeah, my mailing list is my evergreen. Every 2 weeks, 2 weeks a month, I make a post over there, and I sometimes put in personal story stuff in there too. Same like you would, on social media. But I've really been trying to cultivate that quite a bit this year and really focusing on it, and it's been giving good results so far. Fingers crossed.
So the questions are rolling in, and they're rolling in fast.
Yes.
So I want to back up. When we first started this conversation, you all mentioned that as you were working, to get your publishing squared away, that publishers wanted to see a marketing plan. So Jessica asked, how detailed should those be, and what info are they looking for? And I'll add to this: did they give that to you up front? Was that something that was provided, like we're looking for X, Y, and Z in a marketing plan?
For my first book, Wild Women in the Blues, with Kensington Books, I requested and received my entire marketing and publicity plan, along with sales strategy incorporated. But I did request it more than once and shared my background and my interest in being a part of that process. I also shared some strategies that I thought would be helpful. It's really different at different houses what you can expect. I always would encourage an author working with a traditional publisher to ask for your publicity plan, and know when you're going to get big marketing hits. For example, let me know a week in advance if I have a book bub. Let me know 3 days in advance if I'm having a book bub coming up, because I have a network that I can call upon to help me promote that through social media. And when you're talking an ebook, that's a good thing to do.
And as far as marketing goes, if you're indie and you do like get your book bub, like you mentioned, Denny, you can actually schedule promos around that to give it a bit of a boost ahead of time, or ease it down after, so that you keep those sales and those ranks up in those stores for a little while longer and get more eyeballs on it. So that's a good option too.
Absolutely. Does everybody know what a book bub is? Because we started talking.
That's a good point.
BookBub is bookbub.com is an alternate to Goodreads, even though Goodreads is a fabulous mechanism or thing out there in the world too. But BookBub will, you can have followers. They have an enormous mailing list that's a powerful tool. So when you're a publisher or as an indie, you arrange a BookBub, what you're doing after a while is trying to get more readers for your ebook. It's across all of the retail platforms usually. That means the same price point at Barnes & Noble, at Amazon, at et cetera. And that way you can, like, because let's say the last book I had was a couple of months ago for In the Face of the Sun. And on Amazon, it might rank, I don't know, 50,000, which would be the top number. My book went to #1 when that BookBub came out, and I was at 400. And that's pretty significant. And sometimes those BookBubs can last up to 48 hours, sometimes 72. Mine usually lasts 24. So BookBub is a good thing. Is what I'm trying to say.
And you can get a BookBub feature deal, or you can get a BookBub new release deal. Those aren't as good, but they're still good to get more readers looking at your work, if you want to go that route. Going back to the original question about what publishers ask for in your marketing plan, for me, what I submitted was, okay, here's the list of conventions that I know I can probably get into. Here's the list of locations where I can submit to be either an author guest or submit to do panels. Just ways of saying that you're willing to put yourself out there, that you're willing to try new things, and what opportunities are you going to put down for the publisher. This was with a small press. This wasn't with one of the big presses. So they, you have to work really closely with your publisher with that, with marketing.
I would, oh, go ahead, Denny, sorry.
Now, the only thing I was going to add from a marketing area would be to talk to them. I talk to them about celebrity book clubs, from Book of the Month to all of the other ones too. That's something you want to see that's of interest to your publisher if you're traditionally published.
Yeah, I would speak to, for any writers out there who maybe, like, that first book has been set up or you sold it and you're in that ramp up too. You do have to set high goals and expectations, but keep them in check too. When The Devil Himself came out, I'm just going to state plain facts. I don't want this to be misinterpreted as sour grapes or bitterness or something, but there was a publicity plan to pitch the book for review everywhere. And a curated podcast list. And I was happy to go to any book festival or any bookstore in the country. And I was emailing booksellers all over the Southeast, and hoping I get 1% of the stuff on that publicity plan. So I'd have a few things to pump the book up in the first few weeks of release. Plus there was film interest at the time. It's since been optioned by Miramax. So there's a real film project in the works, but that wasn't quite real enough to help when the book was released in May. Anyway, I was hoping 1% of that publicity plan, and I got 0. I didn't get anything on that publicity plan. No reviews. Most booksellers kind of ignored, no opportunities to go visit bookstores, no book festivals, and I didn't think nothing like that. And that's okay. I was just realized, like, this is sort of the stark reality that writers are facing, that even though there was a publicity plan in place and the book was pitched everywhere for this, that, and the other, none of it came to fruition. certainly through no fault of my own, but I gave it my best efforts. And still, so I think it's important to remember, like, you've got to do the legwork and hope for the best, but it is really hard. It is really hard to realize these things in a way that can benefit your book in the long run. And sometimes you have to sort of take the good stuff that happens and be thankful for it, and just not let this stuff bother you, because every book is different, and every writer is different, and every publisher is different. And you might find that your book is coming out in a place where you're going to have to do everything yourself, and there's going to be disappointment. And it's good to not get wrapped around the axle about that stuff too much, because I've been there, and I want writers out there to know that it's not the end of the world, and you just have to know that luck plays a huge factor in all of this. But the things that Denny is preaching, and Marlena too, and Robert, are important to have a foundation. And these are things I wish I had known 10 years ago when I was young and naive.
One of the things that I found to be very helpful was the cicada tree being out on Instagram book tour, and which was wonderful. It gave me access to a lot of book clubs. A lot of individuals actually had an opportunity to at least see the cover and read a quick blurb about the book. There might be one bookstagrammer who would post about it. When you get a couple of thousand people that would like it. So Instagram book tours definitely was something that I felt that I got a lot of bang for the buck with.
And you never know, as long as you have a foothold on different social media platforms. I just had an Instagrammer reach out to me the other day to do a giveaway for one of my books that's been out since 2020. And if you're not listening and you're not paying attention to those opportunities whenever they come in, you don't have at least a foothold in there. They can't, some person might only use Instagram. They don't use any other social media, and that's their main area. So if you're not on there, then you won't get that opportunity.
Another tip that I'd throw out is to identify your local indie bookstore and become best friends, because that bookstore, one thing that happened during the pandemic is the increased structure and modeling of marketing by indie bookstores, which has been very successful nationwide. One of the reasons I actually credit the success of my first book in terms of sales to the fact that I was doing a ton of virtual events nationwide. Actually, I've even done some in London and places like that, all from the same spot in my office at home. So virtual events, working with indie bookstores is a way to help you get out there even more and find that local store that they're just great people. Indie bookstores, Foxtail,
Yes.
we're working with for this event. They're all over the place, and they're fun, and they're interested in authors.
Foxtail has been wonderful to me. They were the bookseller at my launch event, and they scheduled an event for me there at the bookstore. And what's so important is that, to build those relationships, as Denny was saying, booksellers are so important, because if they like your book and they like you, they will hand sell your book.
Yeah.
And they'll read all the books you give them too. And then when someone walks in there, they're like, "Oh, you're looking for this kind of book? I know exactly who to give it." Like they know exactly what books to take to them. So it's amazing.
Yeah, to speak to that in my experiences in France, because I've been able to cultivate a readership over there and have success, like the booksellers over there are amazing. And my publisher has a really close relationship with booksellers all across the country, and are sending them every week little notes, galleys, calling them on the phone. And when they have writers come over in the spring and in the fall for book tours, these booksellers love my publisher, and they've developed a real rapport. And it's been really special to see, be able to experience that. Like it's like what writing and publishing used to be in America in the 70s. It still is, or previous decades. And I'm amazed, and I'd go on tour over there, and these booksellers, it's like they went to school to do this. They went to graduate school to become a bookseller. It's a noble profession over there, and they love promoting writers, and it doesn't matter who's publishing you or what. They just love good books. And word of mouth, they're like the driving factor in that dynamic that you're trying to create. That word of mouth is still sort of the best way to sell books. And so that's special. Everyone's point about connecting with indie booksellers here is crucial, especially if, you know, they fit your niche. You know, like if you write Southern noir or you write crime or mystery fiction, you know, you want to target those booksellers. And connect with them. Like doing virtual events is a great way. In the crime mystery world, that's a huge thing. I saw so many writers in the past year doing awesome virtual events all across the country. And it was hugely effective, I think, for some of those writers.
All right. We are getting so many questions. Let's pivot slightly here. One of the questions that I wanted to dive into is, you know, when you're working with your own publicist or your own marketing person, or, you know, if you're, you know, trying to manage working on that with a publisher team, can you talk about like how you would handle that? Specifically, somebody wanted to ask you, Robert, you know, talk about the publicists that you hired. What were their duties, and you know, did you hire them prior to your book released? What was helpful in that? And you know, if you are open to talking about price, you know, what kind of budget were you working on?
Okay, sure. So initially, I wasn't certain that I was going to work with a publicist, but you know, as I was about a year out, I was starting to get really panicked. You know, I don't even know, I do not know what I'm doing. So first of all, I had a couple of authors. I reached out, you know, have you used someone? Do you know someone who would be great? So I actually worked with and continue to work with a wonderful woman named Anne Marie Nieves, and she's with Get Red PR, and she's out of New York. I was so naive. I thought that I would just, you know, I would query and that she would say, "Oh yeah, I can't wait to work with you." What I did, so we scheduled a conversation, and about halfway through the conversation, I realized I wasn't interviewing her; she was interviewing me, which is interesting because they're going to have to determine whether or not they feel that they can do anything for you at all. Publicists can be very pricey. You know, a couple of, you know, but once I signed the contract, and you know, I'm with the small press, and I knew that, and they were very transparent up front. They said, you're going to have to do the lion's share of the work, which I was prepared to do. I think that I had a conversation with Anne Marie, and we talked about what I felt I needed, and she felt like, based on where I was and where I was positioned as a debut novelist, what she felt she could do for me. And so on pricing, I know that it might be since someone asked about price, I'm not I won't be shy in sharing. I mean, you can start anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000. I went in because I was a debut novelist with a very humble budget of $5,000. I said, "This is what I have. I've been saving for the launch of this book. I've been, you know, eating lean cuisines, so I'm ready." Because I felt like, for me, this first book was an investment, you know, in me and my brand. And if I made money, great. If I didn't, fine. But I felt like what I wanted to do was to begin to find a humble readership. That's where I wanted to start. And I felt that having a publicist would be able to help me do that. So I spent about $5,000. There are a lot of individuals who are savvy, a lot of authors who can do it on their own without a publicist. But for me, because I have the day job, it was important that I had help. She actually did not schedule events for me. She did things like she coordinated NetGalley. She coordinated the Instagram book tour. She pitched me to book clubs. A lot of opportunities for me to interact with some social media platforms, to be interviewed by bloggers and Instagrammers and bookstagrammers. So she did a lot of that work for me. And I took sole responsibility for reaching out to schedule my own events. So we really, in our relationship, I think it was really sort of 50-50. I brought, you know, a lot to the table, as did she. But I'm very grateful for having had the opportunity and the means to be able to work with her.
what sounds so good about that relationship is, and that's the way I would want to have a relationship with a publicist, is that you put on the table the things that sort of like the whole world, and then you really talk about the areas where the most effective strategy will work. So your publicist looked at your roadmap, if you will, of things that could happen, pick the ones that had the most opportunity for success, because that's what you want to work with a publicist who understands how to craft success in whatever areas that they are in, because publicity and marketing for many people is that sort of like, ooh, what in the world are you really doing? I mean, I used to get that a lot. It's like a proposal pitch, give them the charge, and they'd be like, I don't know what you're doing. But anyway, it sounds like a good plan. It was a good strategy.
It was a good, and I did. She was also wonderful to be able to pass questions by. There was an interview that was happening. And the most terrifying question, because I'm a white fellow who's written a work of Southern fiction. And the most terrifying question I've been asked today is, what were you trying to say about the South? Luckily, this was not a real-time interview. It was in writing. So I'm like, oh my God, I said, this could be the beginning or end of me, based upon how I answer this question. So I crafted a response. I passed it by her, and she read it. She goes, yeah, I think that, you've got a lovely response here to go with it. And she also said, tell them, also share the things that you do love about the South as well. So having someone to guide you when there might be potential landmines was certainly very helpful for me.
I might add just anecdotally, because I've got writer friends who have hired publicists and spent a lot of money too. To Robert's point about goals and expectations and keeping them, having those lined up, because if your goal is to hopefully earn a readership, elevate your profile, if it's warranted, you create some prestige for your work, and then you can continue, you can publish, regularly, which I think is most writers' goals. If your goal is strictly sales and film, TV or something, that's cool too. But and a synergy can happen if you hire a publicist between both of those two things. But I have writer friends who have wanted just elevate their profile, create some prestige for a new book, and they've achieved that. Others just wanted sales, and the money they spent on a publicist didn't actually result in sales. It is your mileage may vary kind of situation, but there can be a synergy there between the sort of two dynamics depending on what your goals are. So it is important. You got to, and there are risks involved too. I felt very lucky, at least in France, they have a publicist in-house. And it's like the old school, the way things used to be, where, Devil himself came out over there. And within 2 months, I think it had been reviewed in 20 to 25 newspapers and magazines. They were reviewing it on morning news shows over there. They flew me over for 2-week book tours at a time. And it was obviously incredible experience. But then in this country, without the benefit of an extra publicist or extra hand, I'm relying solely on word of mouth. The book just kind of just trickles out into the world and then disappears, unfortunately. So, like to Robert's point, I think you need to have a goal in mind if you're going to hire a publicist, and know your expectations. Because I have friends who are extremely happy with that decision and others who are extremely disappointed,
And just to chime in with a difference between publicity and marketing, publicity doesn't actually sell books. Publicity sells, well, let me put it another way, builds awareness and brand knowledge. Marketing is about sales. When you're buying, what do we say back in the day? Publicity is about public opinion. Marketing, advertising is about public behavior. You want to prompt somebody to buy, you get into ads, you get into something that you can statistically see where there's an increase in sales. Publicity is awareness and creating buzz. It's social media is a variation of word of mouth, except it's happening with technology, because word of mouth is still the most powerful. people talking about your book.
That's a really good point. And we have a few more questions, and I'd like to try to hit as many of these as we can, given that we've only got 10 more minutes. This conversation could have easily been twice as long, and we probably still wouldn't get to everything. So that being said, okay, somebody has asked, have you ever been tempted to write outside of your marketed genre? If so, would you change your byline? If so, if you did?
Reggie Stoke.
I think you could have, if you're going to be writing really far out of your genre to the point that you don't think your audience would be interested in it, that's when a pen name would be useful.
Excellent. I think that handles that one. Do you find that being an author or a guest or a panelist at a general fandom event translates into increasing your readership as an author?
I do. I think that for me, I think I've had an opportunity when I've been out and about and to actually meet people and to have them, whether it be Zoom or in person. There have been instances where those individuals will follow me on social media. They'll help spread the word about the book. So opportunities like today, I think, certainly are very helpful. Anytime that you have the opportunity to be present before the public. There's an author named Bryn McLean who wrote a book that I absolutely love, One Good Mama Bone, and she gave me some wonderful advice before the Cicada Tree came out. She said, "Go wherever they will have you, and always be gracious." And I followed that advice.
It's great advice too. Like, I was at BoucherCon, the World Mystery Convention, and on the panel I was scheduled to speak at with a couple other writers, the toast of the mystery world this year, Sean Cosby, or S.A. Cosby, was a last minute addition, and just being on the stage with him for our panel, a few people told me later they came up to get my book signed. They bought Devil himself just because of the association. It's like, I heard you talk there and I love Sean's work, etc. And it's just, being there and being out there at a conference, a lot of readers are passionate and they're looking to read new books. And if you're just in the same room as somebody they admire, you might sell an extra copy and earn a reader right there just by being in the right place at the right time. So
yeah, and I think like I'm going to be doing Monsterama late this weekend. I've got a recorded panel they're doing for that, and then Conjuration in November. And I'm just going as panelists for these because I'm trying to give back to the community and to the fandoms and to the people who are out there, enjoying these kinds of worlds that we're all creating. And I think that's a great way of doing it.
I happen to love traveling now that I can travel again, and being able to speak to book clubs or festivals. I have found that conferences as well are, it's networking. And that networking ends up with someone saying, "Oh, I have to read that," or "I want to read that," or again, going back to the indie bookstore experience, a lot of these bookstores had to give up their in-house activities for a long time, and they're gearing back up at such a rapid pace that the readers are just so excited to interact again in person with authors, in addition to the virtual model still being very effective. So yeah, getting out and doing those things is a plus way of getting people to buy your books.
Okay, here's an interesting one. So this kind of goes back to earlier in the conversation where we're talking about what types of content you might post on social media, where that be, personal information, promotional information. This writer is working on a memoir. Should my blog posts, unlike Facebook, be related to the subjects in my memoir? So if you're going to create blog content on a website, should it be, are you creating an architecture around a topic?
I mean, I personally think that, so when I was working on my website is very simple. There's not a lot of bells and whistles to it, but I worked with an expert in the field, and I had these grandiose ideas of like what the imagery should look like, and he sort of took me through a brand conversation. And at the end of the day, it's the photographs that you see on my website are photographs that I curated myself, my own things, in my own home. and I believe that in regards to the question about what he should be blogging about, I say you just need to be blogging on topics that relate to your interest and to your brand. They don't have to necessarily be just about your memoir.
And with a memoir, since you're talking about your life and your interests, and assuming that that memoir is going to have interest to readers, there's certainly some topics in there that you're going to touch upon very seriously. And there's no reason not to bring in some of that history as a part of ramping up interest in whatever. For example, if I did a memoir, I already talk about the entertainment industry because that was something I was involved in, or whatever, Vegas back in the day. I used to hang out there extensively. But those things are things that I think are good to share without giving away your story.
All right. So this is a great tie-up question. If you were limited to one thing and choosing like a channel or a marketing activity or a PR activity, what's the one thing, the most important thing you can do when you're launching your book?
Go ahead.
I'll just jump in and be the grouch, the cynical grouch, and say, write, the only thing that matters are the words on the page. Write the best damn book you can, and don't worry about all this other stuff too much. It's important, and you should study it and have a foundation for it. But to me, nothing matters ever when I pick up a book and says, can this writer write? What kind of story are they telling? And is this a good novel or not? And that's the only thing I care about. And all the other noise that helps sell books is important, and you've got to take it seriously. But to me, still, in my heart of hearts, the most important thing is write the best damn book you can. And don't worry about all this other stuff while you're doing that.
Agreed. Write a damn good book. And my favorite thing, I much rather promote other authors and novels that I love rather than myself. And I think that that's just being a good member of the literary community. I probably, if I could only do one thing, I think it would probably be that.
Yeah. And I say, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So as you're publishing the book that you're working on, that you've just got done, start thinking about what you're going to be writing next.
And those are all very, very good suggestions. I will be a little bit more technical. I totally agree that the first thing on that creative side of your brain is to write the best possible book you can write. On the other side, on the business side, I'd go with Instagram.
That's good to know. Yeah, I mean, because I have no idea what is the best one. I split my time between Instagram and Facebook. So I'm going to take your advice, Denny. I'm going to up my game on it.
I personally love Instagram because I share a mix of personal and book stuff and friends stuff too. And I've also noticed, like, just because I have had some success overseas as opposed to in the United States or in English, a lot more people in France use Instagram and are more engaged, booksellers, readers, writers, etc. And I've just I love just sharing pictures. It's more interesting to me as a medium. So I'm glad I'm doing one thing reasonably right.
I'm sure you're doing more than one thing. One thing you'll admit to.
Wow. This has been such a lovely conversation. And obviously the people here on the screen, y'all are doing something right. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Thank you all for your time. For those of you in the audience, I think we got to all the questions. If you are looking for a conversation, head over to the one-on-one room for the lunchtime conversations, and we'll see you back here for the next panel.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.